This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so as I said yesterday, we are almost like like about a good amount of syllabus has been covered in Azure, and now we are moving into the DevOps side of the things. And there are a couple of concepts more to cover in Azure, which we will take along with DevOps because that's best covered like that. So you'll take it along with DevOps. So before I start with DevOps, Uh, can anyone tell me what do you know about DevOps? Like, what is your idea about DevOps so that we can pick that up and kind of build on that? So anyone, anything. There's no right, there's no wrong answer. So I just want to get some inputs from your end.
Development is a just like a process. Actually, we get the requirement from the client, just like a
Hmm.
work orders or the that based on the work order, we'll work for the uh, requirement. So that
Okay.
requirement, yeah, after that requirement completed, coding is completed. We go for UAT testing. Then UAT testing completed, we go for some uh, pre-production things, and
Hmm.
then pre-production completed successfully, we'll deploy to the production. This is the
Okay.
complete.
Okay. Anyone else, guys? What do you think is DevOps, or what do you know of DevOps? Because you would have heard about the buzzword called DevOps, right? So anyone, come on, guys. I'm expecting some inputs from you all. So anyone,
Development means development and DevOps means development and operations.
development and operations. Okay. Anything
Yeah.
else? Any more inputs? Anyone else? Anyone? Anything else? Okay, so we did receive a couple of inputs. So development plus operations. So DevOps, development plus operations. So operations, and there was someone else who said that we get some work orders and we work on that. And there is some testing. There are a couple of things like UAT and all that stuff. So let's understand this in a more diluted format. Let's see what really as a DevOps engineers that we do. Now, to understand this, we will need to first understand what used to happen before something called as DevOps, like how things used to be or how things used to get designed before something called DevOps, and how did the entire IT industry did function even before DevOps came into picture. So this is something that we'll start with. So let's see. So I have a user. In my case, this particular user is coming up with an idea. Okay, this guy has an idea, and his idea is to design an application called, let's take Ola. Let's say Ola.me, which is a mobile application which he thinks would basically help people to go ahead and book cabs using a mobile application. So instead of just giving a telephone call to someone and kind of booking your cab and don't know where your cab is, it's better for you to go ahead online and track your cab and track the progress of your cab to see where it is and etc. This is the idea. Okay, the first thing that happens with this idea is that now I have an idea, but I don't have people who can design that for me because I am not in the IT, but I want to use IT. So what would happen normally is that I go for, or let's say I put my idea online, and I as a user will now call out something known as tenders. Tenders isn't nothing but where different companies come together and they bid for the project. Meaning now they say, okay, fine, you know what? Uh, I am a company called Infosys, or I am a company called TCS, or I am a company called Cognizant. I will get this project done for you at some cost. Like at some cost, I'll get this project done for you. So that's where there is a team called a business team or a sales team which comes into picture. I'll just call this very loosely as sales or business. So me as a business team, I'm coming into picture, and this is the company right now, something like Cognizant or TCS or whatever it is. So I'll say it is XYZ company who's now bidding for the project. This company is now telling that, you know what, I will get this project done for you with some amount of, money, basically, because this project is worth so much. So I'll get this project done for you in XYZ amount, or in XYZ dollars, something like that. Once the contract is okay, meaning once the company is convinced that this price is okay and the client is convinced that this price is okay, you will have an agreement that, okay, fine, I will get this project done with you, and etc. And this client will now ask that, can you give me a time that at what time this project will get completed, meaning how many months or how many years do you need to complete this one. Now this is where my business team doesn't know anything, because the business team is only looking at the business side of things. They are not technically sound. They are only looking at the business side of things right now. So this is where another team member or another big team called the technical folks like us, we come into picture. So I'll say there is a director level employee who knows the technicalities of things, and let's say technical, and he knows how much time, or he kind of gives a rough estimate to the client that, you know what, before giving you the time, I need some details from you, like couple of things, like let's say, what is the color of your application, to kind of begin with, the very bare basic. Is that, do you want your application in yellow, whatever it is, and what is the target audience, like where do you want to release the application, and what is the functionality of the application, like what do you, if I design the application to you and give, then what do you feel should be the functionalities of the application, like do you want to book a cab, do you want to book a flight with that, do you want to book a restaurant, what exactly do you want to do with this application. So functionality, or the functional area of the application, this is something that the technical guy will, now have a word with the client company. So in my case, the client company is still Ola right now. So there is a team of Ola with whom the technical director or the technical guy is, like, having a word with. This phase is called a requirement capturing phase. This entire phase where I am asking all these questions on what your target audience is, what your functional area is, and all that stuff. This is called as requirement capturing. I'll just say RC. So once the requirement capturing is done, now this is where the requirement capturing actually coming into picture, wherein I'm getting the bare basic requirement. Now the first thing that I'll think of right now as a technical director is that I need a team who can write this code for me, because that's where things starts, right? I need a team which can help me write a code. So this is where I bring in a set of team which is called a developmental team. Developers, programmers, software engineers, whatever you can call them. So I have a huge team. I'm just representing three because my screen size is small here. So I'll just represent three people out here, and I'll just call this team as a development team. Now I hire a development team as a technical director, and I give them the requirement. that this is the requirement that I've captured, and this is the second level. This is level 2. So this is level 1 where we are talking about sales, we're talking about business, we're talking about requirement capturing, and whatever requirements I've captured is now being passed on to the development team, and the development team now also has a couple of questions. Is that okay? Fine, this color target area functionality is all good, and I've got the functionality right now that there need to be a user database wherein I can store all my user data. There should be a button to book cabs. There should be multiple varieties of cabs like mini, micro, whatever that you can think of, multiple cabs. And going forward, we can also get a requirement to book flights, also book flights, hotels, and all that stuff. So this is the core functionality what I'm looking at. This is what the development team right now has. And the crucial question that the development team will now also kind of address is that what kind of a code do we start developing this application in? Is it like Java, PHP, Python, .NET? There are tons of languages out there, Golang, a lot of things basically that have come up right now. So right now we need to understand, or we need to right now, or as a development team, I need to now understand what is this stack, or what is the coding stack in which I'm developing this out. That's the first thing. Second thing is that okay, fine, I developed it. What is the target in which I need to host my code? So I'll say hosting target. So in the hosting target, then I'll have questions like, is it a cloud? If it is a cloud, then is it Azure? Is it AWS? Is it GCP? Or if you say it's not a cloud, then is it on-premise environment? Meaning, do you have physical servers where I can use them to deploy your code and maintain all those things and etc. These are a couple of questions now I'm going ahead and asking. So these questions will now again go back to the technical team or the directorial team. They'll come back to the client and they'll tell you, you know what, this is what it is. The client doesn't understand whatever this is. So the client only needs that, what the software should be completed. The client says this is the budget that I'm, kind of playing around. So hosting target and all is something that you decide. I don't mind because at later point in time you are going to manage the application. I'm just going to use the application. So with that done, let's say the team identifies the language called .NET. Let's say the team identifies the cloud called Azure, and they say, okay, fine, we'll use the Azure App Services for all these deployments and etc. This is our deployment target, so we'll use a combination of Azure PaaS and Azure IaaS services, which would be a bit easier to design and all that stuff. So this is where I'm designing this out, or this is where I am now basically telling that, okay, fine, I know what I'm kind of working on. I know what is the end goal. I know where is the deployment target. I know what my targets are, and etc. And now the deployment team, oh sorry, the development team sets a realistic target of they say, you know what, I need somewhere around 6 months in order to design this application. In order to start working on and in order to start designing this application, I need somewhere around 6 months out here. Fine, great. So my development team started working. It's been 3 months into the project, they're still working. They have like designed like a good amount of work. And now it's 6 months into the project, they have like, or it's like 5 months into the project, let's say it's like 4 or 5 months into the project, and they have some kind of an output. They have some output, some amount of thing, they have some output out here. So they have the product. I'll put it in that way. Until here, are we good, guys? Are we good until the story? So we have a technical team, we have a sales team. Sales team brokered a deal with the customer. The technical team is coming into picture, identifying the technical aspects of the project. And then I hired a development team. The development team also asked a lot of questions, and finally we fixed on things. So it took like about a month for us to identify all the technicalities of the project, and then we started working. It took more 4 months out there, and we are into 5 months into the project. So this is where we are. Any questions till here, guys? Anyone anything till here?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have the product with me. Now I'll say that, you know what, I'll give this product to the client directly. Is this right? Is this okay to do that? So I'll say, okay, fine, I developed it. I'll give the product to the client directly. And the client is going to ask me a very basic question, is that, have you tested it out? Like, before you handing it over to me, did you test this product out? Did you see how your code is working? The development team or the director, the technical team out there is going to be clueless right now, saying that, you know what, there is a phase called testing also. So before handing the product, any IT firm, any company which is developing the product would need another team of testers or quality analysis. Let's say testing or QA quality analysis, another team to test the code using different tools. They want to test the code and they want to basically set a benchmark to the code. They want to set a benchmark to the code out here. So, but one issue that I still have out here is that the development team, while the development team was hired, the development team was handed over a set of machines, meaning physical computers where they're working on, and they're working on physical computers that are running on, let's say, an operating system called Windows. So what does this development team do is that using this particular operating system called Windows, whatever the software that were installed on their laptop, whatever the required tools that were installed on their laptop, they use those tools in order to develop the software. However, the testers do not have an operating system called Windows. They have laptops, but they have, for unique requirements, they have a operating system called Linux installed on it. Or to be in a more simpler way, a different version of Windows. Let's say Windows 7 installed on it, wherein the developer came in and the developers were developing it on something like Windows 10. Now there is one issue that is primarily happening is that it took around 6 months for the development team in order to develop the entire product out, and it'll take at least 1 month for the developer to, or for the tester rather, to test it out. But there is a mismatch in the configuration. What is a mismatch is that the code was developed in Windows 10, but the code is being tested on a different environment called Windows 7. So there would be some sort of compatibility issues that the developer has developed in a Windows 10 operating environment. So this piece of software, what he used, was very unique to Windows 10 because he was only given that particular option to go ahead and develop it on Windows 10 out there. But the testing team was given the Windows 7 operating system to test it out. Now I can do one thing. I can ask the team to live with it, or I can go ahead and ask the team to, I can ask the development team to downgrade from Windows 10 to Windows 7, or I can ask the testing team to upgrade from Windows 7 to Windows 10, which any which ways, anything will take good amount of time. So what this testers do is that, or what this testing team does is that they start testing it out. They start identifying issues with the code, or in very technical terminology, they'll start identifying something called as bugs in the code. And now they identify the bugs. Let's say they took about a month. They identify the bugs and they again come back to the development team telling that, you know what, the code has some issues. It has some issues. Firstly, there are some compatibility issues because of Windows 7. We couldn't test a couple of features, and the features on which we tested had some bugs. So please make sure that the code is compatible with our operating system, and please make sure that the bugs are addressed. Now the development team redoes the code in such a way that it is platform independent, meaning it is operating system independent, and they start writing a code in such a way that the testers can test it out. This is where basically I am trying to make sure that the developers and the QAs are on the same level playing field in terms of the systems they use in order to develop and in order to test. So, okay, the development team addresses this, the development team addresses a couple of bugs, sends it back to the QA team. The QA team again identifies a few bugs here, and they say, you know what, it still has some bugs and it still has some issues with Windows 7. Can you fix it out? So, this tug of war between the development and the QA team is really very common in any software industry because both the teams are trying to achieve a better quality of the code out here. But one thing that I'm losing out here, one thing that I don't enjoy here, is the luxury of time. I told my client that I will take about 6 months in order to give you the entire product, and I've already lost like about 5 months in development, and I've already invested like about 1 month in testing, so 6 months is already done. So my business team is again communicating with the client that, you know what, we need 1 or 2 more months out here, and there are a lot of issues that are happening here at the bottom layer, wherein my testing and the development team are in a very tight lock, wherein they're telling that there are bugs, and the development team is telling that, you know what, there are no bugs because our operating system is not telling that there is no bugs, and your operating system is telling that there is issues and all. So there's a lot of tug of war that is going on in here, and there is no visibility on what's happening in this layer to the director, because none of the developers are in direct touch with him. They're only emails. They're like, the director is like very busy, and there is a lot of issues basically that are happening at the top level. So because of all these things, I'm losing a lot of time firstly, so I'm losing the business, so the client is, losing the trust in the business and etc. So a lot of things are happening this way. Now this model, that's the reason I said what was before DevOps and what is after DevOps, and that's where I'm coming to an understanding, is that this model of development was called as a waterfall model. A waterfall model wherein the workflow is in a linear direction. So the director is assigning something, and then from here I'm going developing it out, and then I'm assigning something to my testing team. So the direction of workflow is one direction. So it's now called as a waterfall model, which was not so efficient, which was not really that efficient in addressing the issues and addressing in making sure that the time is reduced. So the entire idea was to reduce the time and make my code efficient and make my delivery process efficient. This was the entire idea which I need to accelerate. So this model was really not helping. So that's the reason I come up with another model of software development, which is called an agile model of development or an agile methodology. Now, what I will now say is that in an agile methodology, you will have the client, you will have the business team. The business team is in here. They will basically try to broker a deal and etc. You will have a technical team, but this time I now call this guy as a product owner, a PO, product owner, whose main responsibility is to deliver or is to make sure that the product is full and final, and I deliver it to my business team, which in turn delivers it to, let's say, the customer or the client, in my case, which is the company called Ola. Now I will hire a team of developers, that's for sure. So I need a set of developers. So development team is for sure, I need this one out, but I also need someone to help me bridge the gap between the development team and the product owners out here. And that's where I come to something else called as a scrum team or a scrum master. A scrum master, which was a role which came in after the advent, or after, let's say, the start of the agile model of development. And the role what scrum master really plays is that He's a mediator. He kinds of acts between the product owner and the developers. He works very close with the developers. He also works with the product owner. So whatever the feedback that the client is giving to the product owner will give this feedback to the scrum master. The scrum master will give this feedback to the developers. So right now I am establishing a transparent model of development operation wherein I'm saying, okay, fine, there is a layer, there is a point of contact, there is someone who can listen to me, there is someone who can communicate the issues that I have. And now the client is now asking that, what is the time that you need to develop the entire product? Now the product owner comes and tells you that, earlier I used to take like about 6 months to develop the entire product and give it to you, but that used to again stretch to 8 or 9 months or something like that. But this time around, it is not that way. We are following now something like an agile methodology wherein we don't promise to deliver the entire product. I don't give you the entire product called Ola, which will have all the functionalities at one go, like booking cabs, booking flights, booking whatever, whatnot, and etc. No, I am not going to deliver everything. Rather, now I am going to work in something called as a feature oriented development. Meaning, I will now say that, I will establish something called as a feature oriented development model out here, wherein I will start my development procedures in the form of features, meaning I will now start identifying that what is your core functional area. Let's say if the client is telling that, if my application is able to book cabs in the first go, I'm good with that. We can later figure out how you can, book food, how you can book hotels, flights, and everything, all that stuff. So my core functional area in here is to book cabs. So I will say, okay, fine. In the first iteration, in the first delivery, which will take somewhere around 2 months in versus 8 months, I will give you some basic features which the customers can use or which the end users can use to just book cabs. So I'm just focused upon one particular feature. This is where I'm coming to something known as feature out here. So I will now, meaning I as in the product owner will now tell that, we have a feature right now to develop, and this feature is to book cabs. And when I say cabs, there are multiple things out here again, like nano, mini, micro, a lot of things out here. So this scrum master knows what is the capacity of his developers because he understands, or scrum masters or business analysts, they know about the capacity of the developers, and the scrum master now divides this feature amongst the available development teams. Now each and every individual out here is a team out here. He divides this feature, and this feature is to book cabs, right? So this is for cab booking. He divides this feature amongst the developers, and now I am calling this divided feature as a user story. So I am dividing the feature into something known as a user story, and I'm assigning user stories to my developers. So all the user stories, meaning user story 1, 2, and 3, together will form one feature out here. And the first user story will have, let's say, something like micro. Let me write this out. The first user story will now have something called micro. So I'll say it is user story called micro, which is being worked by one of the development teams. There is another user story 2, it's called mini, which is worked by some other team. There is another story called SUV, which is being worked up by the third development team. And these three features together are now called as a feature. So these three user stories together will form a feature. And right now, my Scrum Master says that, you know what, the team is not complete. I have developers. The team is still not complete right now. I also need QAs within my team so that I can test the feature as and when it's being developed. So it is testing oriented development. It's testing oriented development that I do have is that whenever the product is developed, as and when the product is being developed, I will directly involve the QA team to test it out, as opposed to first developing it, taking like about 5 months and then giving it to the QA team and then let the QA team test it for 1 month again. Instead of that, let me get the development team or let me get the QA team in sync with the developers, meaning now the QA is also an integral process or integral part of the entire software development lifecycle. SDLC is now a very integral part or a very important part of the development team. So my development team will only get completed if I have a QA inside it. If I have a QA team along with the developers so that they can work in hand. So as and when I am developing, the QA will have a visibility that I'm developing and they will now test it as and when I'm developing the story, and they'll give the feedback as and when I'm developing it out. Now, what is the time which I need to develop this out? Now, I cannot give a random time cycle. I cannot just say that, you know what, it's 1 month or 2 months or something like that. Rather, I need to give, rather, I in the sense the developers need to give something called as a sprint cycle. This is an agile methodology that I'm explaining, guys, is that all these terms is something that you will normally hear called sprint cycles, iterations, a lot of things out there. What is a sprint is nothing but normally, I'm talking about usually, a sprint is nothing but 2 to 3 weeks of development. 2 to 3 weeks of development and testing efforts. Meaning each and every sprint cycle, meaning each and every 2 to 3 weeks should have an end result. So I would say that in the first feature, which I am telling that it will take about 2 months, meaning it has about 8 weeks generally, I'm dividing those 8 weeks into 6 weeks of development and 2 weeks of testing. So it is 2 sprint cycles for development. Considering the sprint cycle is 3 weeks, I'm telling it is 2 sprint cycles for development, 1 sprint cycle for testing the application. Together, I'm making sure that it's like 3 sprint cycles out there, or about 2.5 or 3 sprint cycles out there. And I'm saying at the end of the sprint cycle, I will have micro, mini, and nano delivered to the customer or delivered to the client through a team called as the operations or the business team. So this is where I'm getting another team called operations, the ops, short form for operations, which after the sprint cycles are completed, after the product is finalized, after the product is tested, ops team will also test the product with their own test cases, and these are called as BAT testing, which is business acceptance testing. And once it is finally tested, they will hand it over to the client, which is nothing but Ola in my case. And once they hand it over to the client, the application is ready and the users can now start using the application out here. Now, this process of development where everyone is involved in the development process is called an agile methodology, which goes by something called feature oriented development, testing oriented development, and in the form of something known as sprint cycles. So right now, all my teams are kind of binded together. They are working together, and there is a transparency in my team so that I mean, everything right now is to just accelerate the development process, meaning instead of, let's say, somewhere around 6 or 7 months, taking about 2 months, taking about some cycles out here, defining some targets, and I am producing a good quality of the code. This is what I'm doing by using something called as agile methodology. And today the entire IT industry is actually using something, or is actually in the mindset of something like agile methodology or agile framework of development. So this is the strategy what we use out there. So any questions till here, guys? Anyone? Anything till here?
Here, if the features are being distributed among the different individuals here, like
Hmm.
micro, mini, and SUV, that means
Hmm.
at the same time, all of the three will give us the product within 2 or 3 months. You mean to say, right?
Correct. It's a parallel development.
Okay. So the parallel development and all the three will be tested by the QA team and also the operations team.
Operations team, yes. Once you hand over the feature to the operations team, they will have to test it. They'll have their own acceptance criteria. They will test it and then hand it over to the client.
Okay.
Any more questions here, guys? Anything, anyone, any more questions here? Now, in here, I have not addressed one of the most important things out here is that in this particular sector, I said that, you know what, the developers are using laptops that are designed Windows 10. The QAs are like, using a different configuration like Linux or Windows 7. So I'll again put the same thing again. So even in the agile framework, my developers are still working on a machine which, let's say, is Linux or Mac. QAs are still working on a machine, let's say like Windows 7. The operations team, which is not a technical team in nature, which handles the operations, is working, let's say, on a machine like Windows 11, which is the latest one. So the developers, when developed the code, used whatever softwares or whatever tools they or whatever configuration they could have within Linux or Mac and developed it out. Testing is being done on Windows 7, and operations is using Windows 11 to again, do some testing, etc. Meaning there is still some misconfigurations out here. Meaning the development team is, or the QA team is still complaining that, you know what, the software that you produced, it is not compatible with Windows 7. There is there is still some issues with the software. The development team tells that yes, because we developed it on Linux, you'll have to test it using that particular environment. The operations guy is telling that, you know what, it's not working in my machine. I don't know how did you test it and how did the test really pass here, because here there is some issues out here. Now this is where there is a lot of issues that are coming in, and there's again a delay on delivery on my end. There's a delay on the delivery. Now, what if I don't develop my code in a local machine? What if I don't develop the entire code in a local machine? What if I don't test the code in the local machine? So, testing development right now, I don't want to use my own laptops. What if the operation team also doesn't test the code in their local machine? What if we bring all of the teams to the cloud on a common platform for development, for testing, and for operations? So if I am binding all these three things together, then that's where I need one specialized team out there which will bind all these things. And that's where DevOps as a practice comes into picture. That's where DevOps as a practice comes into picture, and wherein we say that, you know what, in order for me to go ahead and involve a practice called DevOps, I need a couple of things out here. So I'm telling DevOps as a team and DevOps as a practice, I need a couple of things out here. Is that, yes, great, you are writing your code. So there is a big difference between writing a code and developing the code. So I'll explain what that is. So as a development team, you're writing the code, but where are you storing the code? The developers tell that, you know what, I'm storing the code in my own local machine, wherein, I have like, tons of developers. I have like hundreds of developers, and each and every developer is telling that, you know what, we are storing the code in my local machine. So me as DevOps, I come here and I say, you know what, don't store the code in a local machine. Rather, because if you store in a local machine, there can be a number of issues. You may leave the organization, your laptop can crash, the code, can get corrupt and all that stuff. So instead of storing it in the local machine, let's store it on the cloud in a centralized location where everyone can get access to that. And that's what I now call as something known as a repository, or this is also called as version control, or this is also called as SCM, source control manager. So the version control repository, ACM, etc. So whatever the code is being written in your local laptop, we'll just store it on the cloud. So it is a cloud store, it's a code storage, and it's a version control for the code. We'll understand what is version control and etc. But let's understand, or let's give a very basic definition to the repository as a code storage, kind of a technology. So let's store the code. That's what, as a DevOps engineer, I'm now telling that, you know what, let's store the code not on the local machine, but in a repository where everyone can have access to it. Now I go back to the development team and say, okay, fine. Now you're not using your local machine to store your code. Great, you're using the cloud to store the code. How are you developing the code? Now there is a very big difference between writing a code and developing the code. Writing the code is like using tools like Visual Studio in order to just design your code. And you write a code in a high level language which which me can understand. So for example, .NET or Java, C Sharp, a lot of things out there that are available. I'm writing the code. When I say I'm developing the code, I mean that I'm just converting my code from a high level, excuse me, I'm just converting a code from a high level language to a low level language which the server can understand, or which a computer can understand. Server language out here, or computer language out here, which is nothing but zeros and ones. We also call this as binaries. And this entire process of converting is, yes, technically known as development, but in DevOps we call this as a build process. So build, if someone asks you what's a build process, it's nothing but converting your code from a high level language to a low level language out here. And since I am building this code on a local machine using Windows 10, Windows 7, or Linux, there are compatibility issues. So I will now say that, you know what, I as a DevOps engineer will now say that, you know what, don't build your code on a local machine, rather take it to the cloud. I will build it using something known as pipelines for build. Now I also go to the testing team and say, you know what, the test cases that you have written in order to test it out, don't directly test it from your local machine, rather give it to me. I will test it using pipelines, using on the cloud for testing. I will say, okay, fine, you know what, I'll use a pipeline called testing, and I will use the same machine, or I will use the same set of configurations that I used to build, I'll apply the same configuration to the testing as well so that everyone is in line. I will also make sure to go to the operations team and I'll say, you know what, don't test it on your local and don't give it to your client, give it to the client directly from your local. Rather, we will use a strategy called release, which will be together or which will be summing up your testing and which will also make sure that it will give the code to the client. So I'm talking about build, test, and a release process, which together sums up the core strategy or which together sums up the entire strategy of what we do. So we as a profession is to make sure that all these teams are considered, all these teams are binded together on the cloud, and all these teams are using or all these teams are using effectively these technologies like a repository, like a pipeline, like a release process, and etc. And I'm together now calling all these things are as DevOps process. And now as a DevOps engineer, I need to now decide my technology that you know what, if I am a DevOps engineer, if I'm asking all of them to come here, then I need to establish some kind of a standard, meaning I need to know what are the technologies available for storing, what are the technologies available for building, and etc. That's where we come to different technologies that are available. So a repository, if someone asks you repository, the first thing that will come out of their mind or the first thing that will come out of their head is Git, a source control tool. And in our case, you can use something called as Azure repos. Since we are dealing with Azure, we are dealing with Azure, we use something known as Azure repos in order to store the code. In order to build the code, again, there are a lot of tools available out there in the market. Like one of the most popular tool is Jenkins, one of the most popular open source tools to build your code. You have something called Nevercode, TeamCity, a lot of things. What we are focused upon rather is a tool known as or a technology known as Azure DevOps. Azure DevOps in itself is a tool, in itself is a technology out there. And finally, for testing as well, there are a lot of tools again like Grafana, Datadog. There's something called New Relic. A lot of things out there. Again, we are using something known as Azure DevOps for testing. We're using Azure DevOps for release process. Azure DevOps as such is itself a tool which will or itself is a technology which will combine all these things together, make sure that everything is in one place, which will help you to build, which will help you to test, which will help you to release your code. And how do you really go to Azure DevOps is something like this. So it's called dev.azure.com. This is the URL, what you need to use, and this is where you come to something known as Azure DevOps as such. And you can sign into Azure DevOps using the same ID, meaning using the same ID that you have for the Azure portal. So you don't have to again kind of create a new ID. You can use the same ID out here in order to sign in or in order to basically go into Azure DevOps. You can do this. So we'll look at what DevOps as a practice really is, but how do you sign in? How do you do all that stuff? Let me try to create a new account out here and let me try to kind of sign into it. So let me give me one quick second out here. Let me see if I have any account out here with me so that I can use the same thing. So see reader, great, gmail.com. Let me use this. Let me try using this out. It's already a Microsoft account, so it says okay, fine. I'll try to use this. So just a Gmail account or a Microsoft account, anything will work. You can create a new one if you have already an existing Azure account with you. You can start with that, and this is the first screen that you will kind of see, guys. Is that we need few more details and etc. So it's asking for the name, it's asking for the Gmail account and etc. And I'll say okay, great, all this is good. I'll say continue. So this is the very first interaction what you'll have with Azure DevOps. So once this is done, you'll go inside it and it'll say, okay, fine, getting started with Azure DevOps. I'll say continue. And now it's asking you to create something called as organization in Azure DevOps. This is like the tenant in Azure. So you need a tenant to, kind of play around with Azure, right? So you need something called as an organization to start working with DevOps. And it says your projects will be hosted in something called South India. I'm good with that. And just put in this particular code out here. And once you do this, it will take you into your Azure DevOps organization. So you can give any name to your organization out there. In my case, I just give my email ID to the organization. And once this is done, it will take you into something called as Azure DevOps out here. This is the first thing that you'll actually see. This is the very first thing that you'll actually see. And in Azure, I said you need a tenant. And inside a tenant, you need something known as a subscription in order to start working with Azure. In the same way, you need something known as organization in DevOps, and you need to start having something called as project. This is important. So what I'll do is I'll just give a name to the project, like demo project. I'm just giving a name out here. Project is private in nature. We do not have a public option out here. And I'll say create. So I am creating two things. One is a top level entity called as an organization. We'll understand what an organization, what a project is. This is the organization. And in order to work with Azure DevOps, you need something known as a project. This is like the subscription in Azure. It's a subscription, or it's the equivalent of the subscription in Azure. So we just started with the organization and just created a project which is private in nature. We'll understand what is inside a project and etc. But before that, I have a request for you all, is that please make sure to create this today. Like, even if it is right now, I'm good with that. Please make sure it's free of cost. Like, you do not have to pay upfront anything. There is no charge basically that is there that you need to pay for Azure DevOps as such. So it is free. It is like a lifetime free, kind of a thing. You don't need to pay because you're not an organization. And if you are an organization, then you need to go for different licensings and etc. But after you come in here, please follow this. Go to something called organization settings. So in the bottom of my screen, I have something called organization settings out here. And if I scroll down, I have something called parallel jobs. So I'll explain what this is at a later point in time, but this is something that you need to do today. Very, very important. And there's something called Microsoft hosted. And if you click on this button, you'll get something called learn more. You will be presented with the documentation out here. So there's something called Microsoft hosted and everything. Let me come down. And there is something called to request for free grant for public or private projects. Please submit a request. And there's a button there called request out here, which will take me to a form called Microsoft Forms out here. So I'll just give the direct link to this one, every one of y'all, and I request y'all to please fill it out. I'll tell you what the reason for this is, but if you don't fill it out today, we won't be able to work with Azure DevOps. You won't be able to, kind of work with Azure DevOps. So please make sure to fill this out. So just, I'm giving my name called RBAC Reader. This is the name what I have in this particular ID. This is RBAC Reader. So I'm just giving the name here. I'm just giving the email ID here. So name, email address, and it's telling what is the name of your organization. So if I go into Azure DevOps, this is the link for my organization called dev.azure.com/RBAC Reader. I'm just copying this out, pasting it out here, and I say I'm requesting for a private project, and I'll say submit. This is something that you have to do, guys. So I filled out details like my name, the email ID, and the link to my organization, which is the first thing that you'll see, which is dev.azure.com / the name of your organization. In my case, it was RBAC Reader. And finally, it's asking me, are you requesting a parallelism increase for a public or a private project? I said private and then hit submit. So very simple form, but very, very important to do right up front. Please make sure to do this. Please make sure to submit it. Please make sure you get an email after you submit it. Like after 2 or 3 days, you should get an email telling that the request is fulfilled or something like that. If you don't get it, please again submit it. So please make sure that this process is done. I'll explain why this process, what this is for, and etc. once we get into the course. So any questions till here, guys? Anyone, anything till here? Anyone, anything before we close? Okay, if there are no further questions, then I'm good to close, guys. And we'll meet tomorrow and we'll discuss more on Azure DevOps. We'll understand what DevOps is and etc. We'll do that and have a great day ahead. Thank you.